Entity L enters into a lease for 5 years with a single lease payment payable at the beginning of each year. The initial lease payment is rupees 1 lakh. Lease payments will increase by the rate of LIBOR each year. At the date of commencement of the lease, LIBOR is 2%. Assume that the interest rate implicit in the lease is 5%. How lease liability is initially measured? So we are entering into a lease. The lease is for 5 years and we are going to pay the lease rent at the beginning of each year. So the first lease rent will be paid right now itself, beginning of the first year. That means right now itself. So we can say at time period 0. Then the next lease rent will be payable at the beginning of the second year. Understand, beginning of the second year, it will be as good as the end of the first year. Similarly, I'll be paying lease rent at the beginning of the third year, beginning of the fourth year, and because it is for 5 years, the last lease rent will be paid at the beginning of the fifth year. Beginning of the fifth year, we will understand it as good as the end of the fourth year. Okay, the first lease rent is going to be 1 lakh. Then they are saying that lease payments will be increasing at the rate of the LIBOR each year. Now, the moment you say that the lease rent will increase every year, that means the lease rent will become variable. However, Ind AS 116 says that variable payments which are dependent upon an index or are dependent upon a rate are included in the lease payments. Here, the lease payments are going to be increasing at the rate of LIBOR. So it will become variable, agreed, but it will get included in the lease payments. Then they are saying, assume that the interest rate implicit in the lease is 5%. How the lease liability is initially measured? Initial lease liability is nothing but the present value of the lease payments. In our case, the lease payments will be the variable payments, which will be increasing at the LIBOR, which is 2%. We require its present value. For present value, I need discount rate. Remember, the first choice for a discount rate is interest rate implicit in lease, which they have already given as 5%. So all that we have to do is we have to carry out a projection of the lease payments, discount them at 5% and work out the present value. That present value will be nothing but the initial measurement of the lease liability. Right? So we put as a part of our solution, we say, as per Ind AS 116, variable payments dependent upon an index or a rate are included in lease payments. Next, give the heading. We will say measurement of initial lease liability. Measurement of initial lease liability. Prepare a table here. Here, lease payments. I will like to discount it at 5% and the present value. We are going to pay lease rent at the beginning of each year. So beginning of first year, that is time period 0. Then the beginning of the second year. Beginning of the second year is as good as the end of the first year. Then the beginning of the third year, that will be as good as the end of the second year, and so on. Yes, if any portion till here is pending, just pause the video here and complete it till here. So we say 3 and 4. The last lease rent will be paid at the beginning of the 5th year, and the beginning of the 5th year is as good as the end of the 4th year. So at 4th year, I am ending my calculations. The first year lease rent is 1 lakh. And then they are saying that this lease rent is increasing at 2%. So take 1 lakh in your calculator and add 2%. Then again add 2%. Again add 2%. I'm rounding it off. Again add 2%. We will now take present value factors at 5%. This is time period 0, so that present value factor will be 1. Then 0.952, 0.907, 0.864, 0.823. And now we carry out the discounting, right? This 1 lakh is paid right now itself, so that 1 lakh will remain in present value terms also 1 lakh. Then 1 lakh 2,000 into 0.952, 97,104. 1 lakh 4,040 into 0.907, 94,364. 1 lakh 6,121, 91,689, and 1 lakh 8,243.823. It's 89,084. Take a total. Right, so take a total. 1 lakh plus 9,704 plus 94,364, 91,689, and 89,084. 4 lakh 72,241. This is your initial lease liability. Initial lease liability 4,72,241. If you are still writing, just pause the video here and complete it. Yeah, what is an accounting entry that we may record? It's not a part of our question. They haven't really asked us to record any accounting entry. But if I want to record an accounting entry, what will that be? Just think for a moment. What can be the accounting entry? You are saying this is initial lease liability. Liability will have a credit balance. So it should be to lease liability account, isn't it? So it should be to lease liability account. I'll say it is 4,72,241. What am I going to debit? See, try to recall what was the cost of the ROU asset. If you are calculating the cost of the ROU asset, what will it be? Cost of the ROU asset will comprise of initial estimate of lease liability. To that, you should be adding any payments that you are making to the lessor before or at the time of commencement of the lease. From that, we should be deducting any incentives that we are receiving from the lessor at the time or before the commencement of the lease. If there are any initial direct expenses that you are incurring as a lessee, you should add that. And similarly, if there is any dismantling cost or any restoration cost, then its present value should also be added. So these are the items which will be comprised in the cost of the ROU. In this question, they have not given us any payments that we are supposed to make to the lessor before or at the time of commencement of the lease. They have also not given us any information about any incentives that we are receiving. Also no information about any initial direct cost or anything relating to the dismantling or the restoration. In other words, there is absence of other elements. So only one item will be included in the cost of the ROU asset, and that item shall be initial measurement of the lease liability. So my accounting entry basically will be, right, your accounting entry will be ROU asset account debit. So ROU asset account debit 4,72,241 to lease liability account 4,72,241. This is just something extra that we are discussing over here.